Welcome to the Black on Black Education Podcast, where we interview the most brilliant minds
and connected hearts to discuss our shared passion for the transformation,
the revolution,
reimagining,
and recreation
of education in the Black community.
My name is Eva Loren Jean Charles, founder of Black on Black Education and New York City high school teacher.
And I'm Jamal Thomas, her partner and dad, education enthusiast.
And we're your hosts. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe.
And most importantly, to enjoy the episode.
Hello. Welcome to another episode of the Black on Black Education Podcast. It is another week. We have another guest, and we are going to ask our guests our same question. Who are you? What do you do? And why do you do it?
So I am Deidra Mayberry. I am a co-founder and executive director of Reading to New Heights. It's a nonprofit, and I do it because it's my heart, it's my story, and it is just so important to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to learn to read.
So, let's talk a little bit about, literacy. I think that there's a lot about it that I've learned as we, researched and prepared for this podcast in terms of, how many people just at this point, they don't have access to literacy. It's actually a huge problem. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, so if we're really looking from just a broader, like in the US, there is about 130 million adults that are not reading at a sixth grade level. So that is 54%. And that is huge, so much to where it was shared that if we can get everyone to be reading at a sixth grade level, that we can add $3 trillion back into the economy. Yeah. So just in that, it is amazing just to see. And it's crazy because it's just the sixth grade level. It is not all the way through 12th grade. It's not beyond, K through 12. It's just at a sixth grade level. So that in itself should speak volumes to the literacy problem that we have in the US.
Right.
Yeesh. Oh my goodness. I think it is. I mean, it was so beautiful to start with those stark kind of statistics, because I think people need that reason to like continue listening to this entire episode. And it's so funny because literally right before we got on here, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine about, as educators, the conversations that we have about parents and sometimes the really limiting conversations that we have about parents and like their inability to take care of their kids, and they don't do this and they don't do that. And we're like, well, we're looking at 54% of our entire nation is not reading at a sixth grade level. So literacy gives us access to incredible amounts of things. So we're like, pick up a parenting book. Can I actively read, decode, and comprehend what I read in that parenting book? And so like, it's just, it connects to so many facets of our lives for adults not to have access to literacy. So, I mean, just thank you for starting there and setting the tone for us. So I actually started my educational career teaching people older than me, which was just a wild experience. And so I was teaching at an alternative sentencing program where everyone that I worked with was either overaged or undercredited, and was using the program that they were in to receive the education instead of having a sentence where they would be in jail for whatever they had, whatever crime they had committed or been convicted of. And so it's just great. Like this is near and dear to my heart because it was one of the first things in education. I was like, we need books that are not like for kids, but then like are for people who are on lower grade levels. And like, how do we do this thing? And it just wasn't like, I'm not a writer, but yeah. But it was something that I just was passionate about from the beginning of starting that work. And so through my babble and to my actual question, why was this the topic that you decided was like, I'm passionate enough about this to create an incredible solution for?
Oh, that's a big question. So, so many reasons, but one, if we just go to the very basics of there's so many things out there available for children. There's so many after school programs, there's initiatives, there's, you name it, there's some type of resource. But I always ask the question, what happens when these children that are struggling with literacy or they're low literacy, they graduate and they don't fully master the literacy, right? So in a matter of one day, they go from children who struggle with reading to adults. But do we have the same resources? And personally, the answer for me was no. So I was a child who struggled with my literacy. And at a young age, there was so much shame just attached to that, that I didn't really know how to get the help. So then once I finally was like, okay, I will not be successful. I won't be able to navigate through life well. Let me go get help. I was already 18. So I got turned away a lot from a lot of these programs. So then I went into true survival mode, right? It was, okay, how do I just make it work? What job can I get where I won't be exposed? And it was just a huge thing. And just going through my own life, knowing the limitations, knowing the fears to go to doctor's appointments and can't fill out the application, or the info take that they do when you come in, or going on jobs and having this desire to do more, and give back, but not having the skill set to do so. So always being shut down. It was just something so special to me because I was that adult who couldn't read well. So much to where it paralyzed me on so many levels, from in family, relationships, friendships, from, again, working situations. And it was so hopeless. And I was working so hard to just hide and navigate and try not to be exposed. I was exhausted and I felt empty. And one day I was like, I'm working so hard to fix it. What if I work to hide it. What if I work just as hard to fix it? And it was that moment that, like, the light bulbs went off and I was like, okay. But I knew I had to get over that shame and I had to share with someone. And once I did, they started tutoring me and my life drastically changed.
I worked so hard to hide it. What if I work just as hard to fix it? That is like the tweetable for today. Because that's literacy, and that's so many other areas in various different people's lives. And as you were talking, like I felt there was like a weight. And as you said, working towards fix it, I could see you light up just a little bit more. And you know, that weight gets lifted, because I can only imagine, like, you know, we take for granted, you know, when we are somebody who doesn't have you know, any challenges in that area. It's difficult to fathom what that must be for you know, for a lot of people. What are some of the other effects, you know, of that I'm sure you hear stories all the time of people who come into the program. You know, what are some of the effects of illiteracy on people's lives?
The biggest one is it becomes generational. So you mentioned earlier about, you know, parents that aren't caring for their children, and you have to realize they don't have what they need to help care for their children, to help elevate them to the next level. So what happens is, and not always, right, but in majority of the cases, they just pass. I don't care if it's a D, C, whatever gets you to the next grade, right? Because they don't have it themselves. And when you poke too much and you ask too many questions and you try to fix it, it shines a light on them that they're hiding, right? So their children now suffer from that. And that's where you have, you know, maybe lack of ambition to really go to college, to do more, to be more. And it becomes very basic. Like I mentioned, from just jobs, you can't, you know, you have to be able to read well to function in a job, especially nowadays when you really step into digital literacy and all that goes on there. So then you're really looking at, how do you take care of your family? What does your access then become? You experience different things, so you live life differently, right? So you have a lot more poverty and just things like that. It's really funny, but shame is a huge thing. And you can think about, let's remove literacy, anything. If you're embarrassed, if you lack, if you're not at the status quo that others are, and how it makes you feel and how you act out because of that in those situations and what that looks like. So imagine someone who is illiterate, and anything that happens really shines a light, and they kind of shy away from most things in life.
I mean, I love that you like stuck into the shame piece, right? Because I think that is something that gets overlooked a lot when we talk about education in general, but particularly when it comes to working with adults. there's a deep level of shame of what you're experiencing, whether it be, I don't take good care of myself, I don't work out often, I don't like all of these things. There's so much shame around not doing those things, particularly in a world where there's so much access to seeing other people doing the thing that you can't do or that you are not yet able to do. And so I think that like you're touching on such a key piece of like, how do we unpack the shame around the things that we're not able to do so that we can then get the help that we need. I mean, it just makes me think about like my 3 younger siblings have ADHD, right? And like the shame around how I feel when I can't focus and when I can't do this and when I can't do that. Those of you who listen to the podcast know that that's something that my dad struggles with, right? And so like when people feel too much shame to talk about the things that they don't know or they don't understand, they don't have access to then go and learn and understand that thing. And so it's just making me think about what are the ways that your programming gives your participants access to unpacking that. Because I can only imagine that that's a deep part that needs to be like worked through to get them to keep coming, to get them to like get on this journey with you.
Yeah. So a great question there. So one of the things about our program, it is we really focus in on it being discreet and one-on-one. The most that we will ever have is 2 to 1, but it's really just one-on-one. And so I get the question a lot, why are you different than other literacy places that are supporting adults? And I can say a couple of different things, but the one I want to focus on now is that not everyone has the courage to be in a group setting. Not everyone is willing to expose themselves, even if it's other people that struggle in their same, have the same opportunity, sharing their story. They're not ready. So we kind of help them to say, okay, it's me and you, and no one else knows unless you share with them. So this is your safe space. So we give them a safe space where they don't have to be judged, where they don't have to worry about what someone's thinking. Whether they have really good jobs where they've been hiding so long that they're secretly trying to work on these things so they can continue to advance, and they're terrified of their employer knowing and them not being able to have a job. Or if they know nothing at all, no social skills, they're super low literacy, we really give them the space that it's safe for them to really work on their literacy. And we help to celebrate them along the way. We don't judge and ask, how did you get here? We don't care how you got here. We just want to help you, right? There's so many different things where everyone wants to know a backstory. We're not interested in your backstory. We just want to help you change your story, right? So those are just one of our biggest things. And part of some of our best practices is to make sure that everyone is treated with dignity and respect, because that is a big thing in how you talk to people. Even in that, as you're going through the lessons and you don't know this, and it's about like the tone, it's about the questions that we ask, how we make them feel as they're going through, really creating a level playing field where they feel safe to really do the work. We check in. Sometimes it's not a great match, right? Sometimes, I need a different tutor, and we're able to really assess that early on and give them what they need so they can be most successful and comfortable. Because a lot of it is that if they're not comfortable to do the work and to be vulnerable to do the work, then progress slows down.
And I can imagine that I'll add something to, why your organization is doing so well. And I'll relate it to something that I often tell people. So, I love to cook. And I tell people all the time that, somebody else can use all the same ingredients. They can make something the same way that I did, but my food is going to wind up tasting better. You know why? It's because of the love. And just based on these few minutes that we're here with you, it exudes, and that means it likely exudes throughout the entire organization. And I know you asked for volunteers, and in those volunteers, they're saying, that you're asking for 4 hours a week with people. Generally, people don't say they're going to give up, 4 hours if they don't also have, some level of passion and desire to be helpful to people. And that the way it's come across to the screen to me, I imagine it comes across to your employees, to your volunteers, and then, flows into the people who you guys are helping. So, you're doing, what is magical, magical kind of work, particularly, if people understood what $3 trillion, it means. Like it's yeah, this is something that's definitely extremely needed. Something that I think about often, and you know, this may just be me pie in the sky kind of thing. I think about the idea of young people teaching older people. So I saw that people have to have some type of certification and things to that effect. And generally it's, you know, there's this top down, the older people teach the younger people. But what if there was some methodology where we provide in schools some type of literacy programming where young people go to solve this obviously huge challenge that we have in the country, and we teach them how to do it, and do it in a way where all that care and concern that you talk about takes away what would otherwise be shame, but also offers adults a whole new perspective on what it means to be young. I'm curious if that's something you've ever given any thought to.
So one of the things that, you know, we deal with now is, so we deal with adults. So a lot of them are much older than our tutors, and not in all cases, but there is kind of that initial, you know, this is a little awkward, right? This is someone that's older than me. I'm teaching them. I now become there. So it's kind of working through that piece. But I think you said it. And the goal is in schools, that is where, you know, bullying happens, and like just all of figuring out who you are and all the differences, right? And that really starts heavily in, like, I want to say probably 4th grade. You're not really up into that point. You're kind of like, oh, we grew up all together, it's fine. And it's really about that, maybe we'll say 3rd or 4th grade, that things just start to change. And there becomes, I have this or whatever that looks like. But I think if there is a way, even if it is peers in the same class, if you have someone that is stronger in a certain area, before it becomes a drastic night and day difference, really being able, how do you pair your peers together and really have them to support one another, right? We see it when we do class projects, but typically in that you have someone that is super just excels and loves the subject, and someone who just does not, right? So then you kind of go through that piece. But I often think if we can get them younger and we can have them to have a heart around just giving back and teaching and whatever that looks like, I definitely think it can change. Because what I was going to bring up is, and I'm sure you guys know as educators, that in the 3rd grade, depending on how you do on a reading test, that is where they project prison beds. And when I first heard that, that was devastating to me, because my thought process goes, you give up on them in the 3rd grade. And there's all these grades left for you really to pour in. So how do we get before that point? Do we have programs or initiatives, right, that allow peers to really support and help each other? And if it can be, what are the like things, and if it's book clubs and all those different things that really allow them to have a common interest, then it works, right? There's a potential that it really works.
I just appreciate what you're saying so much there, because it's talking about so many of the facets of our society that are lacking in the way that we think about things, right? So from that standpoint, the idea that we recognize that literacy is so important that it can lead to criminality not having it. But let's invest this money into they're just never going to happen. I've given up on them in 3rd grade, rather than recognizing that we know what the problem is, but we're not going to create the solutions that need to be created in order to relieve that problem from happening. We're just going to prepare for the problem to happen, which is just so unfortunate. And then the other half is this really beautiful thought and freedom dream around like being able to partner adults who are struggling with literacy and young people who might be struggling with literacy, and recognizing that like teaching to be able to learn is what mastering learning is. To the point, like I tell my students all the time, I'm like, okay, cool. Y'all can regurgitate what I said. Cute. Now, can you teach it to the class? Can you teach it to somebody else who doesn't know this? Can you talk someone through what we did? Like when you get there, that's how you get a 4. They're like, I can't get a 4 unless I could teach. Yes, because that's excellence, that's mastery. And
Yep.
you might not master every single thing, but there are pieces that you can. And when you have to force yourself to figure out how to teach someone, you're going to learn 10 times more than when you were learning to be able to write it on an essay or put it into an exam. So I just like, it's so crazy how the dichotomy between those two things is so real. We have to like sit with it, and then, just like you said, create opportunities and solutions, because we see it clearly, but unfortunately it's not being invested in by the people who it absolutely should be invested in by.
Yes.
It puts a smile on my face hearing her say that, because when she was younger and I wanted her to, help teach her younger brothers and sisters, she did a little bit, but she didn't feel quite as passionate as she just did there.
Because I was a child. 1, 2, because I took care of them. When I didn't want to. So I might have been a little bit more excited if that was not a part of my job description as the oldest sibling. Thank you. But it just moves me into the next conversation around, like, we've been talking about kids and literacy, we've been talking about adults and illiteracy, and I'm just wondering, from someone who also has taught in both arenas, but clearly not as much time spent with adults, what are the specific differences, or the stark differences, or the research? What does it speak to in the differences around working with and providing solutions with students in terms of increasing literacy for adults and children?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things, it's just natural, right? And I don't think it's like this anymore, but as a parent, if your child wasn't in school, you could go to court and you could, be fined and all the things. So you have this force of, I'm making you go to school, you have to go, and you have to show up because I told you to, right? That one. As adults who are working on their literacy later in life, they're doing it because they want to. They see the benefit in not having it, that they're willing to figure it out to make it work. The difference that I love about children, if they're sponges, they just soak it all up. They're not jaded with life. They just have this, their imagination is beautiful. And I love, love, love that about teaching and sharing just new concepts with children. But when you have adults, we're jaded. I know I was the worst student. I had so many questions. I always pushed the envelope. I was always why? I was trying to learn to prove that it was wrong versus just accepting, what that looked like. So in English, it is the most challenging language to learn because there's so many rules. It's so many exceptions to the rules. So in learning, it was never just oh, okay, I'll accept that. It's like, well, why? Well, why does that not work here? And it was just so many questions on why. Also, for children, they can get further because they don't have life responsibility getting in the way. Adults have jobs, they have children of their own. There's so many other distractions. So really their fight to want it has to be strong because their time is pulled, right? I think, again, in the spaces of where children are still trying to find themselves and they want friends and they're kind of going through that awkward stage. Most adults are not working on their literacy in a group setting or wanting to learn in a group setting unless they're open to learn in a group setting. A lot of that time they want it to be private. They don't, so by the time they get to that group setting space, they want it so bad they don't care. They're not really worried about what the next person's doing. They're not like, yeah, we'll be friends and hope you like me. I am here for a reason. I'm here to get this thing because I have goals, right? So I think in learning, things stick with you when you have experience. So that's another thing, again, from children and adults. As you are teaching, you can give more examples of experiences that they can grasp. Where children, they may catch it or they may not. They may be like, okay, maybe I'll catch that later. I'm sure you all know probably there's something that a teacher or a parent told you all the time as a kid, and it wasn't until you're adult that you were like, oh, that's what they were talking about, right? You catch it later. So so those are just some of the biggest differences, and then just some studies that we've looked at. That's why a lot of adult programs and things, the completion rate is not always strong because they're fighting with so many other things.
Right. You just gave me one hell of an aha moment. And when you said that, you weren't a good student, and then you went on to say how you would ask why, and you would ask why. And this is who I was. And I'm oftentimes saying I was such a terrible student. But in that moment, I was like, no, I wasn't a terrible student. The system with which I was learning in was a terrible system. And it still happens to so many students today. Like we put them in a place, and Eva and I talked about this just yesterday, where we always talk about, we want to make sure that they develop a love of learning. No, they came to school with a love of learning. And somewhere, somehow, we put like tests and grades and all of this stuff in front of them, and we stopped that. That happened when they got to the school. They stopped, loving that learning. So, what's something that you would say to educators, with your experience, with adults? What do educators need to know about not snuffing out that love of learning, from your perspective? What would you say?
So I think two things. One, I would say as an educator, you have the most vulnerable spot in a child's life, or anyone who you're teaching. And that can really embrace the learning, or it can just stop it completely. So you have really the power to empower and to inspire, or deflate. So just using that wisely and really responsibly, right? As people have been entrusted to you in that space, and making sure, and just giving them the freedom to learn it their way. And I think so many times we are told it's just this way and that's it. And there's not a lot of discussion to get to the why. This is the end all be all, but really allowing exploration to happen in whatever that is being taught, and really being able to use your mind to get to that space. Because if not, that's how we become programmed. And we do things and we don't know why we do them. We just do them because we've always done them, or we were told to do them, and not having our own why behind why we do certain things. But I think the biggest thing is teachers just have such a unique opportunity to really enhance a person's life, just in that small amount of time that they have them.
Yeah, no, I'm sitting with this idea, the questioning, that was something, the why. And we ran a book club last fall with Dr. Chris Emden's Ratchetdemic, and something that somebody said, I think it was in the first session, Anna, if you're listening, we love you. She said, because of the way we've been socialized to become adults, exuberance infuriates us. And every time I think it rings in my head all the time. Because my little cousin, she wants to play, she wants to jump, she wants to run, she wants to go here. Evie, why? But why? And you're like, shut up. And you realize that you can't do that. You have to let her do that, because now I'm reconditioning myself to do those things. I have to recondition myself to ask why. I have to recondition myself to ask questions, because as a person who did extraordinarily well in the traditional education system, that benefited me to be quiet, not ask a question when the teacher asked, answer it when they wanted to, say the right answer at the right time. You learn how to do all those things, and then you realize that real learning is an ability to inquire, to ask questions, to figure out how things work. And so it's wild, because it's just coming so full circle of just conversations that I've been having a lot, particularly today, around how we use questioning, how we think about what learning is, and how we give students access to that process by requiring that they do that. You're not receiving an education if you're just getting information from someone. You're receiving an education if you're learning how to learn.
Yes. And it's so funny. I always, in just different opportunities that I've had to train or teach in different things just in life, I always give the wrong answers. I always say the wrong thing. And I do it and I tell them, and they're not like, oh, well, we know she knows that's wrong. I do it because someone else really thinks this is the answer. And there needs to be validation in why they think this is the answer. Let's talk through it so we can get to the right answer, right? And being able to show the different angles, because even if we give the right answer, if I still think that my answer is right, that's what I'm going to believe, because no one's helping me to understand why the answer I chose was wrong, right? So I think it's really important to allow people to answer wrong and allow there to be conversation again around, well, why is this wrong? And how do we think, or how do we get here so that we can get to the right answer? And I think that's how you really learn, because like you said, it's a part of the learning process. And then you know when it really does come up again, and it's not, I mean, this is the first time I'm hearing it. Maybe it could be right, and we've just never explored that, right? No, we have, and it's wrong, right? So I just think it can't be, everyone says who has questions, but no one really wants questions, right? They want to just move on. Stop me if you don't understand. No one wants to say they don't understand. I am that person that's always like, I'm sorry, just for clarity. And it happens like 5 times. And I used to apologize for it. Now I don't. I'm just like, I'm not clear. We can't move on until I'm clear. So let's go. But
and I love that, because it gives other people permission to do the same. And so like when that first person goes and asks the question when they had it, you're giving other people in the space permission to be like, all right, I was also confused about that and this other thing. Let me raise my hand.
Yes. And I used to always get like sidebar texts like, thank you so much for asking. I was lost too. And I'd be like, why didn't you say anything? Like, but you just see that is how it is. So yeah.
Somebody literally said to me yesterday that they hated to be wrong, and I was just like, I guess we all do, but I hate to stay wrong. Like, I mean, it's fine to be wrong. It's just don't stay that way. And the only way we're not going to stay wrong is it moves into the area of like spirit. Like when you have to have the type of spirit that allows for you to not be scared, to be a little bit vulnerable around people, because more times than not, nobody's going to call you stupid or anything to that effect. More times than not, most of that conversation is just occurring in your own mind.
And that's what I say, we deal with literacy, but I always say, like, sometimes ask for help, say that you don't know. And it just helps, just brings it a level playing field for everyone. Because so many people look at everyone like, oh, and they're just so smart, they know. And it does something when you just say, well, I don't really know. And I don't do that well. Like if we just as a society can get used to saying that is not my strong suit, but you do that so well. What pointers do you have? How do you navigate through this space when this happens? Even when, I could go on about that. But anyway, I just feel like it is not just literacy. It is in all spaces. If we could just say, I don't know. Hair is a big thing for me. If I see someone that has like a bomb fro, I'm like, oh, wait, so how did you shape your hair? Because I can't do that, right? And sometimes it's just about asking, and don't try to reinvent the wheel. If someone's already doing it well, just ask questions. But anyway.
These are the kind of things that I often speak about, kind of social technologies, and it's the way that we interact with one another on a day-to-day basis changes. Really, if we just can all trust each other a little bit more, if I trust you, then I am going to be fine saying it. But so many people are on guard, and because of previous trauma and things to that effect, and to your point, I can go on and on, like because it brings on so much of a bigger, broader conversation. So, we did you want to say something, Eva?
No, I mean, yeah, because it brings on such a broader conversation, because this is something that Iolani, one of our team members, brought up to me, where there's such a huge correlation between illiteracy and violence. There's a huge correlation between illiteracy and anger. There's such a huge correlation between illiteracy and holding on to trauma, because when you don't have access to be able to read and understand other people's experiences, you don't have the information, the words, the intellect, the ability to articulate your own. And so, like, this conversation went from like, what's the problem with illiteracy? Here's the issue. Like, this is the thing, to, do you see how this spreads into almost every other facet of our lives when we don't have access to illiteracy? And you're saying, again, that's up to that 6th grade level. We're not even talking about, we're not even talking about people who can read at a college level, academic journals, all of these things. This is huge, huge, huge work.
Yeah, I don't know, and I don't even know, we won't stay here long, but did you guys see Central Park 5?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's a when they're in court, and the oldest, I don't remember his name, but signed something that he didn't read because he couldn't read, but that wasn't exposed until he was in court. Right. And they were accusing him of these things. It's like, I didn't do that. Well, you wrote it right here. And if you remember, he lashes out. And it's really, like, for me, embarrassment, shame, because he's being exposed in front of all these people. He has no idea what he signed because he truly can't read. And you see, they just see him as a monster then in that moment. But really, it was a child who was just embarrassed about being exposed and being accused of things that he didn't do. But he signed a paper saying that he did because he couldn't read. Right. I literally was sobbing. And this was before we started the nonprofit. And one of my friends paused. I was like, I don't want to watch it alone. Let's do it as a group. And I remember she paused and she was like, do you know them personally? Because I was crying so hard. But it was just the reminder of the call that was placed on my life and how I was so ashamed that I was sitting. And it was something so small, but it wasn't small, it was big. But in that moment that I was like, how often does that happen when you talk about violence, when people are being accused of things or embarrassed or belittled, and you truly have this shame knowing that you can't do this thing, it shows up differently. And that's always one of my fears and concerns when I'm talking to our learners, is really making sure, because a lot of them, they're projecting how they feel about themselves, what someone else is saying, or how they feel about them. Yeah, right. And it's just a whole big thing. But it starts, shame is just a huge part, and it just shows up, and you have good people that do bad things, or they lash out, and they're, it looks like they're this bad person, falsely accused, and then here we are, right? So it's just so much bigger than literacy and not having access to life. It can trickle down in so many different areas. And a lot of people that are stealing or doing different things is because they can't find a good enough job to provide for their families. And I'm not saying that's okay, but that is what they result in sometimes, because well, how is somebody going to get it? Yeah. Right. $5 at this place is not going to do it when I have children and a family at home waiting for me. Right. And as prices go up and increase, a lot of people are literally a paycheck away from being homeless. And it really is that better job that really is going to make or break it. But if they lack literacy, then what happens, right? So
it's our institutions, failing in a lot of ways. And I'm curious, like, in the midst of this, because you lived, things could have been very different for you. So, like, did you feel like somebody failed you in the midst of it, or did you put it all on yourself?
A combo. As a child, I felt failed. So my dad was in the military, so he traveled a lot. So he wasn't home. And my mom, because I have a big family, she was working like 2 to 3 jobs. So I felt like, who's here to help? Right. Mm-hmm. And there was a long time I had to adjust. I was angry. I'm not even gonna lie. I was angry because I was like, they set me up for failure. Mm-hmm. And then not realizing that you do the best that you can with what you have and what you know. Right. And then later, as I got older and I wanted to get out of special education, once my dad got stationed back, he was my advocate. He told me, Deidra, everything says you have to be in these classes, but if you want to be out, I will get you out. But you have to promise me that you're going to try, because it's going to be hard, and I will match your effort. And that was huge for me, because I was so behind. From 6th to 8th grade, I was in a special education class. I was not learning on my grade level. it was the same things year after year. And it was me that pointed that out. I was like, first I was happy I wasn't getting whoopings for bringing home 12s on my report card, because you got a 12 for showing up. If you showed up, you at least got a 12 for participation. But I was just doing so poorly in school that I was just so behind. So I would literally have to bring my books home. My dad would have to reread whatever we did in class and then just explain it to me audibly in a way that I can understand and that made sense to me. So my dad's a big jokester, so I remember things like that. So he would like use family members and tell me stories to tell me something. And then I would go back and I'd be like, okay, oh, this person's this person in my family. And I would be able to understand the story or the lesson that I got from my dad and just trying to figure it out. But that was exhausting. And I know it was exhausting for him.
For sure.
And I had 7 other siblings at home. So I'm from a blended family, 12, but it was 7 of us that lived in the house at a time. And so I want to have to think about, I was pulling for so much attention because I needed it. And I didn't want to be exposed. So I didn't want my siblings to know. It was like our secret for me to kind of work through it. And it was constant. And there were times I was up late after midnight, just trying to get it in, like whatever that looked like. And it was just exhausting, but he was with me every step of the way and did the same thing for me in college. Like every day I called crying. I don't even know what they're talking about, but I was so determined to rewrite my story because so many people had wrote my story for me. I was supposed to be everything but what I am today. And my dad told me I don't have to settle for what other people write or say. Well, my end will be, I get to determine what that is. And I worked my tail off to make sure that the story looked different. And as I got older, I took on a lot of the blame. I was like, well, why am I still here? Should I have done something different? And then I started questioning as an adult, what more could I have done versus still being in this space?
Just like my dad said, kudos to your dad. Thank you for sharing your story and just being so vulnerable about your personal experience. Because again, I think that there's somebody who's listening to this who is going to be like, wow, I'm experiencing that now, or I see myself in that. So thank you. And I think that like where I want to go as we begin to wind down is just, you talked about the impact of working on your literacy for yourself. What has been the impact that you have seen from the people who you work with? And what is your call to action to other people who are doing this work? That's my
so much. So I always say I hope, well, I want it to grow bigger, but I love like the intimate spaces that I get to with everyone that's in the program, because I see a little bit of myself in all of them. So that part is just really special. But I think to just be able to, okay, I'm going to give a couple examples. So when some people started with me, they couldn't even hold a conversation of a, hi, how are you doing today? I'm fine. Like could not. They were just so low literacy. They had nothing. So to be able to just see the confidence in like conversations of like, yes, I'm good today. How are you doing? The weather's not like all just from a social aspect of just what their vocabulary looks like, their confidence, what they're learning as we go. Like we had some adults that didn't know what recess was because they didn't experience it, right? So if it was a homeschool situation or whatever, so we're like, well, what's recess? And they're guessing of what it may be, and us pulling up pictures to show, well, this is a playground where kids play for a school break. So to see, and again, it's one like we mentioned earlier, most kids know what recess is. We went to recess, we know, so we take it for granted that someone has no idea what recess was growing up as a child, right? And that they're learning these things now and they have these ambitions and goals to do so much. When we first started, they couldn't even articulate anything. Right. So that's super exciting. Someone who was able to like, they were in a GED class, but couldn't read, that they couldn't pass a GED class, right? Mm-hmm. Because in GED classes, they're not teaching you literacy. They are teaching you the material and you need to be able to comprehend it you know, and be able to apply it. So
that sounds like a problem in and of itself too, but you know.
So just to see that one of our adult learners who that was their thing, and they were just so bummed out that they're here in this program, hearing them just spit off all of the spelling rules and what they mean and giving examples, going to get their driver's license, passing the test, buying their car, getting a job while they've been in the program. Like, it is just those things that are small that when you are so ashamed and lack confidence and just afraid about being exposed, you play it small. I'll just do this thing. I'll, you know, do this minor, I'll babysit or do these things that won't expose, but to really be able to go out there and to just start your own path in life. It's been awesome. An older gentleman who said no one knew, he's like, but my wife says that they probably know because I always mispronounce things. But to see him preach his first sermon and sharing that and just being able to like see him read from the book, like, I was like, I'll watch this 55-minute sermon, but I was so happy because it was one of our adult learners, right? So it's just to see, and it's not small, it's huge. So some people it's small, but to see their lives drastically changing. And my biggest thing, and just everyone being able to read if they want to, everyone should have access. But I really believe we're all here for something. And literacy should not stand in the way from you fulfilling whatever your purpose is here on earth. Mm-hmm. It is very true that it will slow you down if you lack a skill. And that was the biggest thing. So I want people to be able to truly be who they were called to be and to do the things they were called to do. And lacking a skill such as literacy, which is so essential, should not stop that.
Yeah.
It opens so many doors. I don't know if we've talked about how, you know, if you can read, then all of a sudden you can write. Like, you know, as that not good student, I started writing at out of high school and stuff. And people would be like, this is pretty good and stuff. And I'm like, how did I learn how to write? I don't know. Cause I didn't really do it in school. It's because I was reading what I wanted to read. And it just opens up so much for people.
Yeah. And it's your own style. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I have one question that you know, I want to think aspirational and future and stuff. I studied a long time ago, like accelerated learning techniques. I actually used to read faster than I read now. Like somehow I took time where I didn't read and I lost some of those techniques, but I want them back. Is that something you've ever paid any attention to? Like the people who can look at the page and really, you know, take in the whole thing. Like they say our brains are capable of doing it. Is that something you have any insights on?
So I don't have any insights on it as far as from like a nonprofit perspective, and it's something that we're going. But I do know people that, I don't know if they're like scam readers or whatever, but I have friends that literally like, oh, give me 5 minutes and can tell me. So I know that it's something that is possible, and really trying to take a look at, I think my question is in that, this is just my thought, is how do we do it to where it is something that they retain? And it's not just in those seconds you have to tell someone, but will you remember it 2 days from now, right? So just really making sure. So, and I think that's just my own personal thing of, I've spent so much doing enough to get by. I'm now looking at longevity. What is going to help me to stay and to be able to hold on to this material? Because you hear people talk all the time about like short-term memory. Oh, I used to know that, but now I don't. And so my real question is kind of like you were saying earlier about when you're teaching, you really have learned when you can teach someone else. Absolutely. Right? All day long, yes, you know it, you can pass the test with it, but once you can teach someone else who doesn't know, then you've actually mastered it. So when I think about, because we have people that are like, oh, I just want to be able to like be a super reader. And I'm like, well, hold on, let's focus on being able to read and let's get there first. So I think that it would be something to look at. And I think at ways of it takes people years to learn how to read. And, you know, so I do and hope that for the nonprofit, we can figure out just different ways that helps us to get through that process through a little faster, but it still be just as effective.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love that. And so, I mean, it's every time it's some sort of shock that we've made it to a 50-minute conversation, because it always just feels so organic and we are just digging in and speaking from our hearts. And so I'm grateful. But before we hit our last and final question, where can people find your work? Where can they support the work that you're doing? Where can they make sure that like we continue to build, grow, and scale your work in Dallas?
Yeah, so most of all of our handles are just readingtonewheights.org. So whether that's our website. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And really and truly, it's about word of mouth. So just sharing, doing lots of great podcasts like this one today to really just try to get out the messaging around adult literacy to really help remove a lot of the shame that is often attached.
And then real quick, one thing I'm not necessarily clear on is the work it's focused in Dallas, but you work with people everywhere.
Yes, it's virtual. Thank you so much. I do not want to miss that. It is virtual. It is virtual, and it is free of cost for the adult learner. So if someone who really wants to work on literacy, we have removed the financial barrier that normally stops most people from working on it. We just ask that you're committed, right? Because we have people that are committed to you and that want to do the work and that want to show up. But we just want to make sure, as it is a free service, that you are committed and you're ready to do the work.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Incredible. So the way we generally end is we flip the script and turn the table and allow our interviewee to become the interviewer. So if you have any questions for Eva or I, please let us know.
I would say, what was your moment of clarity that education was important to you, and not just education, but Black education?
Wow. The day after Nipsey Hussle died. I obviously, for myself as an individual, had already come to an understanding that education was going to be a key part of my life, and learning was something that I enjoyed to do. But the day after Nipsey Hussle died, I was teaching at the alternative sentencing program that I talked about earlier, and students were like, it was the government, it was this, like all these things were like, they were just talking about all the things that were kind of like coming out in social media and conversations that were happening. And I'm just sitting in this space, and there was so much like sadness, but also joy and laughter and anger and like connection to the experience. And, oh, I have a friend that this, and throughout that entire conversation, there was absolutely no lesson had. Like the lesson planned out. But the reason why that was the day that I knew that I was going to focus on Black education was because I knew that so many of the students that were coming to this program, some of them all the way from Coney Island to like downtown Brooklyn, were coming to engage in the learning process, whether they knew that or not. Because our ability to sit and look and read through the articles that were coming out about his death and his murder, right? Like, and the work that he had done and what he did in his community, and like us digging in and watching those videos, like that was learning. It wasn't preparation for the GED, but it was learning. And I recognized that like I had a key sense and a key ability to connect with people. Yeah, some of them were older than me, some of them were the same age as me. But I had an ability to connect with them through this idea that they still had that love of learning. It just had to look differently than what the traditional education system was offering. And I wanted to figure out how I can create space for that. So, yeah.
I love that.
And I don't know that I have as, single a moment. But again, being a not good student, I left high school with terrible 1.6 grade point average. Not that I cared. Like I also didn't, it wasn't as if I felt bad about it or anything like that. But as I did go on and I read more and kind of my own personal growth journey, it occurred to me like, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People was one of my favorite books. And I'm like, why didn't anybody ever tell me about being proactive? And why didn't people tell me? So it was just like the things that when they were teaching in school, where I was you could not convince me that I was going to need these things. Some of them I was wrong, just from a structure perspective and things to that effect. Like, you said, still have challenge with, but some of the pieces, it was so apparent to me that this is more important than that. And so I just long felt like I would do something to be a part of the solution, not knowing what it, would be. Up until, Eva called me one day saying, yo, I got this thing. I heard it on a podcast. He said Black on Black education. And, the rest, ultimately is history.
Okay. All right. So one more question if I have time. So for Black on Black education, what is the legacy that you hope to leave behind?
It's like people ask this question at different points and where we're at in the development of Black on Black education, so it always changes.
I think she's getting a little closer to me in her answer in some way.
I think the legacy that we want to leave is our communities are, and when I say our, I mean historically marginalized communities. Have been marginalized from power, have been marginalized from paper assets, but have not been marginalized from from leaving a mark on this world like no other people. Our music, our hair, the way we talk, the words we use, the everything, the swag, the dopeness, the lips, the body, all of it. We want to leave a legacy like that. Okay. We want to leave a stamp that tells people that in the same ways that we dominate fashion, music, all of it, we dominate what it means to learn, to love learning, to be excited and about engaging in conversations that are intellectual and that are bringing us to whatever it means to be the higher order thinking. We have done that since the beginning of time. And so we're not going to stop doing that now.
Yeah.
And that in that we also start to take advantage of the financial, rewards. And it doesn't have to just be financial in the traditional sense of the word, because, there's powers within our communities that we don't know actually exist as a result of, not being properly educated around. So I think we kind of envision right now, we're focused, really, really heavy on student-centered approaches to education and understanding what turns students on and what they want. And then, as we move along, we want to be able to create products and services. It's, why does our community need to buy bunches of Scholastic and bunches of highlights, and why is Pearson serving our students? Why can't we create a collective of organizations that we serve our communities' educational needs and requirements, and our communities grow, develop, and become places that people all over the world look at like, how did they go from here to here? We did it because we love to learn, and we looked at what the real word means, which is to bring out the best that's in each of us. So that's where we look to go.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Two very, very good questions. We definitely appreciate it. So, on that note, that's another episode of the Black on Black Education podcast. Please check us out again next week.